Hi, everybody. Welcome to another conversation with the curator. I'm Eric Hockley. I'm the curator at Foothills Art Center, and this is our YouTube channel, You Are an Artist, where we try to bring the arts to everybody, even if they can't come see us in person. And we try and democratize arts for everybody, regardless of your background. I'm here today with Brooke Shaden, who was going to be our summer exhibition, a photographer, but unfortunately, due to the unforeseen circumstances of a global pandemic, who'd have thunk it, we have had to nix her show, and we have an online version of it up right now. It's kind of a preview of the series, and we're going to be talking about that preview today and going over it in a little bit more depth. So, Brooke, why don't you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Eric. So I am a fine art photographer primarily, and I would also say a conceptual photographer. My work is largely based in the idea first and then trying to translate that to a global audience. I'm also a self-portrait artist. So a lot of what I do, I would say 95% is self-portrait work, and I work 100% by myself. So that's where I derive most of my joy, is just being totally alone through the creation process and getting to call all the shots. So my work is very dark, very sort of mysterious, sort of ethereal at the same time, which is a little bit weird, but that's what I've been doing for the last like 11 years or so, is that type of work consistently. So I've spent the past decade just building on that vision of how I can bring beauty into dark art and how I can communicate that to a large audience.
Yeah, I may or may have not described you as metal at one point or another. Yeah, I think there's a lot of depth and beauty in your work, but light is not a term that you would use. Not for, I mean, some of it has a little bit of an airier quality. If you look at your website, there's some stuff
Yeah.
that's a little bit more fanciful. But the series that we're going to be investigating today is a bit heavier. So
Yes.
strap in, everybody. I mean, we're not going to be here that long, but this is a little bit heavier. So trigger warning. What is it about your method of photography that gives it the kind of surreal quality? So much of it looks like something that is supernatural. And
Yeah.
this will be evident to all of you guys if you haven't looked at the online gallery yet. When we start looking at the individual works, everything I'm saying is going to make a lot more sense. I would, if you're watching this on YouTube, which is likely, um, do pull up the online gallery on the Foothills Art Show website and take a look at some of the work. Maybe pause the video and come back, because I think we're going to be referencing that a lot before we actually screen share it. So how do you get those images, these like crazy vignettes where things seem like they're floating in space and supernatural things are occurring?
Yeah, so actually, I have two kind of technical answers to this. The first one is that I am a big believer that if you have too many elements in an image, unless it's done exquisitely, it's confusing and difficult to look at. And I love simple art. Like, I love a composition where the subject really stands out and you know exactly what you're supposed to look at when you first pull up an image. So I try to sort of eliminate backgrounds as much as I can. And that doesn't mean that there aren't locations in my work, but that if I'm out shooting in a field or a forest, I try to add a lot of fog to it so that the
Mhm.
background is a little bit more indistinguishable and the subject really stands out. But then the other thing that's like my favorite thing in the world, and I could totally geek out for a long time about this, is color theory. And in all of my work, you'll notice that there's never a true white or a true black point, which is very typical in photography to have those true whites and true blacks showing. And if
Oh
you go
yeah,
to any
that's
sort of like photo class or school, like one of the first things that they'll tell you is make sure that you have a true black and a true white point in your photograph. And
I learned that in drawing class.
right,
Yeah,
exactly. And I
yeah.
just I just don't really buy into that so much. And I'm so obsessed with different types of paintings, like Baroque paintings, chiaroscuro and stuff like that. And you notice in a lot of really beautiful sort of Gothic style paintings that there is very rarely a true black or a true white. It's always sort of like the white is skewed yellow so that the light
Mm.
looks really warm, or the blacks are skewed gray or blue so that they have like a milkier tone to them. And so that's what I do in a lot of my work, is I try to get rid of those black and white points. And then I also try to add in color washing over the whole image, instead of adding color just to the midtones of an image where it might stick to those, medium colors in the shot. I try to make sure that the highlights, the shadows, and the midtones evenly receive the color, which gives it sort of an otherworldly feel, because that's not how the world looks around us normally.
Yeah, it would be like wearing tinted shades or visor on
Exactly.
all the time. It gives
Yeah.
everything a cohesion that is
Yes.
unnatural, right? Because in real world, things affect each other, but like
Yeah.
for real, they are not actually connected under one visor. It's almost like a metaphor for the way in which people view the world, like the rose-colored glasses metaphor.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the ones I'm looking at right now have kind of there's it's like a limited color palette, and does that film, not actual film, but that layer you put over the top, does that contribute to that?
Yeah, and it's actually kind of a funny process that I go through, because I will in almost every single image I've ever made, I will desaturate the whole image, not 100%, but to the point where that you can't really see any clear color in the
Hmm.
shot, and then I add color back into it, and
Okay.
that allows for one single color to really stand out over the whole image, rather than there being disparate colors all over the place.
Sure, I'm definitely picking that up. That's kind of what I meant by monochromatic. There is a dominant color
Yes,
and then
and I
everything
make
else
sure of
feels
that.
totally. That is evident. That is evident for sure. I love
Yeah.
that. How much occurs in the camera versus after the camera, like in post?
It's kind of funny, because over the past decade, so many people have written to me saying, "You're not a photographer. You can't call yourself a photographer." And I get that inclination to say that, but I shoot everything myself, and I shoot it all on location and sort of there. So it's not like I'm making anything digitally except for adding color and things like that. So
Hmm.
there is compositing involved. Sometimes I'll go out and I'll shoot 15 different images all at once that I then add together later to create a certain effect.
Yeah.
So when I say that, yes, I'm a photographer, it's because everything is very photographically based. But then when I get into Photoshop, there's a lot of, enhancing of textures and adding textures, a lot of color work, a lot of light manipulation as well, which is huge for me, because I'm not going out and building sets. I'm not lighting sets. I just go out and use natural light. So for me, it's all about getting those images into Photoshop and truly, really strongly manipulating the light so that it
Hmm.
looks like it has a certain effect that it might not have had in camera.
Do you have to take most of your photos outdoors? Or do you
It's
like
a
find
mix.
bright window spaces in order to have that natural
Well,
light?
I actually find kind of dark, sad window spaces. I'm looking over here
Okay.
because there's I have one window in my 10-foot by 10-foot office, and that's where I shoot a lot of my images, and where I shot many of the images for this series that we're going to show together, just in very tiny rooms with not a lot of light coming in. I
I
shoot
get,
very dark. It's like my style to just try to, bring
got
up
you.
the light later.
Labels, I hate them. I hate trying to put people in a genre. It's really just
Yeah.
a means of trying to market you, is really why you would worry about, like, what am I? Am I a photographer? I don't know. How do I want to define myself? Like, why don't you just
Yep.
look at the art and make it up for yourself? But your your photography is the foundation of everything. It is the building block of the art. Like, if you're talking
Yeah.
about compositing multiple images, like, it's, you had to take them. You're not
Exactly.
sourcing anything. You're not pulling these things off of the internet or magazines or whatever, like collage work. You are
Yep.
creating everything from real life, like.
Hmm.
And then the photography is the base skill at the bottom of it all, and then all the other
Definitely.
decisions that you're making in regards to how things look in the end are photographers' decisions, right? Because you're manipulating these images, you're making decisions about light and color that you're not a. Do you do some work, though? You had said you paint over, or you do some after.
I am for this series for the first time. So it's
Okay,
my
first
first
time.
time really diving into mixed media, which I'm excited about, because I feel like most of my natural sensibilities, if I ever had any, lean toward painting sensibilities. That
Hmm.
sort of like you can manipulate every single element of the art. And a
Yeah.
lot of photographers will take an image and then say, well, this is the image. This is what I have to work work with. But I look at it and I say, you know what, like if I want there to be like a swipe of red on my cheek, then I'll add it there. If I want
Sure.
there to be like in different colors. And so I kind of look at it like every pixel is an opportunity to cover it or mask it or change it or keep it. And I think that a lot of photographers don't think to that extreme.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was just thinking about what is like the painting versus working in the computer for modifying your images. The computer is like the height of intentionality. Like you said, you can get into every little pixel, and if you don't like it, you can change it. When you're
Yeah.
working in real life in like an analog format with a paintbrush, you don't have you have to realize that some things are out of your control. You don't have
Right.
molecular control over
Yeah.
the paint, right? You have a
And you can't just
brush.
hit undo. You can't
Oh,
just go back in
no,
history, you
no, you
know?
can't. You cannot hit
Yeah.
undo. You cannot say like, oh, that pixel yes, that pixel no with the swipe of red, right? You just have to hope that that swipe is as good as you can get it, right? So there's
Yes.
definitely a little bit of a loss in control in moving to the real world, like post as a post processing means. So it's kind of
Yes.
interesting. I'm really curious to hear more of your feedback on that as you progress and you get a little bit
Yes.
more time under your belt for the mixed media stuff. This is really
Hmm.
interesting.
It
So
has been interesting. It's been very much that, which I'm sure everybody who's ever picked up a paintbrush feels, where you're about to make the very first stroke and you're like, is this going to be right? Or am I about to mess this up completely? And do I have to start over? And so every time I've gone to work on one of the pieces, it's like, can I do it? Should I just close my eyes? I don't know what to do.
close your
But it
eyes.
always
Yeah.
works out. Yeah, closing the eyes is not a good idea, I found
Yeah.
out. But yeah, it's been really good and very eye-opening, because it's just you don't have that hesitation when you're doing photography, because it's digital and there's no reason why you would have to worry about it. You can take 1,000 images, and then if they don't work out, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really cost you anything.
Right.
But the benefit of my background in education is that I was trained in filmmaking. So one of my degrees is in filmmaking, and I shot everything on film for my films that I made in
Mm-hmm.
college. And so I was formally trained with the thought of like, if you take more than 2 takes, you can't afford any more than that, so you're done. And
Film is
so I went
expensive.
into photography that way, thinking, even though it's digital, my mindset was just get it right the first time. And that's actually what led me to plan so heavily all of my shots. So I would have everything sketched out, written out, every little detail, so that when I went to take the picture, and to this day, I still only shoot anywhere from maybe 1 to 10 images per photo shoot, because I just don't need to take more than that.
Wow. Yeah,
I just
there's
don't even like it though. Like I'm not into photography really, to be honest. Like I think it's fun, and like I enjoy creating the works that I create, but I'm
mhm.
not a photographer's photographer. I don't take my camera anywhere. I don't love shooting things. So for me it's like, okay, let's just get this done
Oh.
and get it done as fast as possible.
It is the best means to your end,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
You have an end goal in mind, highly meticulously planned, and the means of taking a photograph of it as like the base point is the best means for you. But the
Exactly.
act of shooting pictures is not, that's not where your passion lies.
Yeah, it doesn't do it for me at all. I
That's
never have a
really
camera. Even sometimes I wish I did, and I never have one with me.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about this series that we've got up on the website now in kind of a preview format. I think we've got
Okay.
5 pieces.
Hmm.
Samsara is the name of the series. And
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about where that came from and the overall general scope of the series.
Yeah, so about 4 or 5 years ago, I noticed that I was dealing with grief in a way that I had never dealt with it before, which I
Mhm.
was very aware of. And there was sort of an inciting incident for that. But I found myself trapped for 2 to 3 years in this just continuous cycle of grief. I would think that I was over it, and then I would start the cycle back up again.
Mm.
And I started to wonder, how do different people in different cultures deal with their grief and interact with people who are grieving? And that led me to researching death and grief and the culture around that, which led me to this word samsara, which is essentially the cycle from birth to death that all living things endure. And I
Mhm.
thought that was a really interesting way of sort of interpreting grief, is that it is a cycle, and it is something that we all will cycle through once or many, many times. And the reality is it's probably many, many times. So I started
Sadly.
to read books about death culture and rituals and grieving rituals. And I started to realize that in all of the cultures that I was reading about outside of America, basically, there are these beautiful death rituals and grieving rituals that celebrate the dead or celebrate this time in your life when you're grieving in some way. And it doesn't mean that it's happy necessarily, but that there is some reverence toward it, and really outspoken um, conversations happening about it. Whereas here in America, we tend to be incredibly closed off about death. We're taught not to really discuss it. We're taught to sort of grieve by yourself and to not let that be like a public display, lest
Yeah.
somebody think that you are emotionally unstable or, whatever is happening. So that became really interesting to me. And part of why I wanted to create the series was because simply doing the research and then planning to create the work really helped me to sort of get a 40,000 foot view of my own grief and
Mm.
figure out how that fit into the larger public context of what grief is. So that's where Samsara came from, this need to explore grief and what that means for myself and for others around the world.
That's yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking about how, like, I was reading your artist statement and I was thinking about the cycle and how you can feel like you're not right, you're not getting to an end, you're never finding this place of closure. And it does, I don't know, my experiences with the feelings of death and grief, I find I can go through those kind of the typical, what do they call it, the five stages,
Yeah.
denial, anger. I can go through those with other people's death. If I have a
Yes.
tragedy in my life, I do go, you mourn and you work your way through it. And then I'm probably just as much, a victim of my upbringing as anybody else. You were talking about the American way of kind of a stoic approach to death. You can mourn
Yeah.
amongst close family and friends, but then, like, if it comes up in polite company, coworkers, whatever, your best approach, or at least the best approach we're taught, is to kind of keep it together, and whatever that means, maybe that means
Right.
internally you're burying a bunch of things, but when it comes to the thoughts of my own death, I am in that cycle, like that, okay to grief, to like existential dread, and like
Yes.
rolling around in it, and that might just be a product of like hitting your mid 30s and everything starts to feel like the wheels are falling off for the first time in your life, but you start to think about death a hell of a lot more. And yeah, I can really relate to that wanting to like go to the marketplace of ideas and go see what the rest of the world, like, this is not a new problem. It's the problem,
Right.
right? That's the problem for every human being. So there's got to be other
Exactly.
ways of thinking about it. Nobody should feel like they're on their own.
Exactly. And you know what I actually think that happens in cultures where we don't speak about it very openly is that it's we all know about the five stages of grief, and it's like a common thing to talk about because it's a book, so like of course we know about
Yeah,
it.
it feels it's
But
cliched.
yeah. And so outside of that, though, I think that like what we strive for, because we don't have open conversations, is some sort of closure. Like, okay, now I've thought about this and I've dealt with those emotions. So now I'll be okay until I die. Like, I won't think about this anymore and it's going to be okay because I've already dealt with it.
Problem
But
solved.
then yeah, but I think that the reality is that in cultures like ours where we don't talk about death and grief very openly, there is this sense of entitlement, like we're entitled to be okay because we've dealt with something. And I think that in a lot of other cultures they don't have that sense of entitlement that they're going to be okay. Like they recognize that this will be a continuous conversation throughout our entire lives until we die. And I think that's a much healthier approach to death and grief, is to just let it be an ongoing conversation and ongoing feelings instead of trying to just close that chapter and move on, because it will never work. Because the one thing that we don't know is how we're going to die. So
Yeah.
obviously we'll continue to think about it.
Yeah. Or what it's like to die, right? There's no way of knowing and there's no way of telling anybody.
Yeah.
And even for as many people who have like died and come back, like near death experiences and that, like everything is going to be so personalized anyway, you couldn't possibly hope to express it. Yeah, I
Right.
think you're right. A lot of the angst comes from the feeling like you deserve a closure. Like there is
Mhm.
a closure and there really isn't. And that
Right.
continuous conversation, that's really, really interesting. I was also thinking about how the difficulty in coping with death leads to different ways in which cultures treat their elderly, and
Yes.
how elderly are, I think a lot of people have trouble interacting with elderly because they are a mirror of your own mortality, right? I
Totally.
have grandparents who, like, my eldest grandparents are both experiencing Parkinson's and dementia, and you go visit them or you talk to them on the phone. My family's mostly in New York and Florida, and I call, and it's getting harder and harder for them to even be on the phone, and it gets very, very difficult. And for all the grief you're feeling, I think there is a substantial portion of it that makes it difficult because you're thinking about, what is it going to be like when this is me? And there is no closing that book. Like you said, there's
Right.
no moving on, there's no checking that box. It is just difficult, and it will always be difficult, right? Like it's just not,
Yes.
yeah, the more you block it off, the harder you make it.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on exactly what I'm feeling, which is that it is difficult, but maybe it should be difficult. And like maybe that's just part of life and it's okay for that things are supposed to be hard. But I think that we don't want that. And so we think, no, there must be a way to make this easier. Now I'm just gonna like search for that book that will make this easier and then everything will be okay. But some things are just meant to be hard. But you know, the point of my series is to open up those conversations so that even though it's difficult to come to terms with, and we may never do that, at least we can look at death and grief in a more open context where we can have conversations and look at those images that are visceral and disgusting sometimes, but that also have some beauty in them. And I think that it's more so a way of life that you adopt to find the beauty in the darkness wherever you can. And I think that a lot of cultures do succeed at doing that around death.
Yeah. Yeah, the beauty and the darkness. Like I have this, I had a friend pass away a couple of years ago, and when he was going through his battle with cancer, and we knew it was all like coming to a head, I sort of have these like images of like other things in my life dying, and I have a dog that's like getting like a little bit older, and I just started
Yeah.
to think about, like you're saying, like these disgusting images. I had this vision in my head of like my dog, he's like rotting into the earth,
Yeah.
and then like, but
Yeah.
on a long enough time scale, like everybody's right there next to him. That's just like, dogs' lives are condensed versions. It's like a 15-year
Yes.
experience in a good situation, so compared to
Hmm.
80 years or whatever. And there's, I just kept thinking about that, like we're all going to be there someday. It's just, I don't know, I don't really know if there was a point to those thoughts. It was just something that came up in my brain when you were saying about
Well,
like
it's
the
it's
disgusting imagery.
exactly. You're right, because and that's what I'm trying to put into my series is this, like, first of all, the fact that we see decay as disgusting is a cultural thing that we have decided. Like somebody decided this is gross. Now we all think that this is gross. But what if we looked at it and said, well, this is beautiful because now this person or this animal is going back to the earth. And eventually what looks like decay will eventually look like dirt and
Yeah.
mud and whatever. And like we
Right.
don't think that's disgusting. So
No.
it's all about a matter of state, just like our lives are. We look at young people and we think they're beautiful, and we look at old people and a lot of people don't think they're beautiful. But it's all the same as the leaf and the dirt and the baby and the middle-aged person, and it's all the same. So I think that my goal is to start to change our perception of how things look so that we don't have that terrible visceral reaction to turn away right away when really we should be looking closer.
Yeah, it's just our brains conflating, like, yes, death can be disgusting if it's in your drinking water, right? Like that's
Yes.
where it all comes from. That's why you find it distasteful, is because there's this built-in fear of disease, but it's all
Mm,
getting mishmashed up with the way in which you feel about your grandparents and the way in which you feel about
exactly.
death in general. And it's this, like, this classic thing that happens in human beings in a lot of venues, is the misappropriation of evolved traits to like affecting your mental health in the modern world. We're just not, I say it all the time, we're like not built for the world we live in, and by the
Yes.
time we are, we'll be far past that, and we'll be in a we're just going to be playing this this game of catch up existentially for as long as we're around.
Exactly.
But yeah, you really tied it up perfectly with the idea of the everything connected. That is the wheel, you know. That's the turning of it all. Okay, resume the share. This image, this one is really surreal.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more, like, it's pretty gross.
I love gross stuff. Hassan Najjar,
I do
executive
too.
director of Foothills Art Center, hates gross stuff, and he whinges all the time at any art that's icky, and I'm constantly bringing around icky art. So sorry, Hassan, my boss. But yeah, tell me about how this one, what culture is this inspired by, and just go for it. I won't talk.
So this one was one of the very first images that I created for the series. And at this point, I was really focused on this idea of decay and how we perceive that and what that might look if if decay had a singular form. I was thinking, so I went on this trip a couple years ago to Italy, and I parked on like a very random mountain. Like I did not know where I was. I was completely lost in the middle of Italy. And we just hiked up to the top of this hill for no reason. And at the very top there was a graveyard, which we had no idea was there. And an earthquake had been through many years ago, and the graves were all just like shattered, and you could see down into the caskets of some of them, and it was really interesting. And from that point on, I started to think, like, what happens beneath the earth? Like, how frequently, this is kind of weird, but like, how frequently do bodies slide around and touch each other under there? And like, what happens if a grave breaks, and what does that look like? And so I started to sort of imagine what that would look like in this image, sort of the mingling of different people underground and what that would look like. This is really gross. I know we're really going for it here, but
This is reminding me something. Keep going though. It's really wild.
no,
Yeah.
and yeah, that was the inspiration for this image, is just, mixing a lot of different limbs together, not being able to see exactly what body parts are what. And for this particular image, a self-portrait, I covered myself in paint, and then took sort of like my hand and like kind of held my hand with syrup on it on different parts of my body to take the paint away from certain parts, so that it had that sort of almost like blood type look in certain parts of the image,
Okay.
which were actually
I
just
see
hand.
prints here,
Yes,
right? There's a
exactly,
handprint here
exactly.
we can zoom in on.
Yeah,
It's clearly
exactly.
digits. And
Yes, and so all of those little like sort of orangey parts are my sticky hands that I was taking
okay.
the paint off of my skin with.
Oh my gosh. You let this paint dry and then it was peeling, or it was pretty
Yeah,
wet?
no, it wasn't terribly wet. I tried to get it dry so that it
Okay.
had almost like a clay texture to it. I wanted it
Okay.
to look pretty dry in the final shot. So.
Yeah, this reminds me of, okay, so I'm a big anime nerd, and there's an anime that I'm obsessed with called Neon Genesis Evangelion, and there.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Okay, so you know, and nobody else is gonna know, but I'll repeat it so I'll say for their sakes, there is a group in that show called Sele, and their goal for the human race is to eliminate loneliness by combining all souls into one super being. And this is what that kind of reminds me of when you're talking about bodies under the earth breaking down and recombining, and that is how this is the embodiment of decay. It's like everything gets remixed in the entropy of it all and becomes one, and it's just kind of a surreal view of that because things aren't broken down yet, but it's like it's symbol of that.
Exactly. And I thought that it would be fun to sort of take all of these limbs and let there be distinctly human things happening in this. You can see legs and feet and hands and
Oh
arms,
yeah.
but then it's
Ba-
so
back.
distorted that it's sort of just like saying, we've got these elements that are human, but what really makes somebody human? I mean, is it the form that they take, or is it the soul that they have, or whatever you believe? I'm not saying that I have an answer to that,
Yeah.
but I wanted to really question that in this image, is just, like, where does someone stop being a human? At what point for you?
Whew. It's fascinating. I want to see all five. It's not that I don't want to keep talking about this
No,
one.
no,
I just want
please.
to,
You move at the
I want
pace
to,
we need to move
I
at.
want to see all five. I thought this whole series was going to be Joe Rogan Experience 3 and 4 hour episodes, but my communications end person told me that I need to try and keep them at a watchable length of
No
20 to
worries.
30 minutes. So, oh wait, now I'm in Zoom. I gotta get to the next one. Boop. You can see this piece now of these women.
Yeah, yep, there you go. I was gonna say it's kind of stuck, but now we're good. Yeah. And so I'm glad that we're looking at these two images back to back, because they are very much inspired by the same thing. It's really just the same concept portrayed in two different ways. This was a particularly funny image because I shot this in Las Vegas. I was speaking at a conference there. And so I ended up going with my friend and had my hotel room and got like 3 gallons of glue. And we actually shot this just in the entryway to my hotel room, just covered her in glue. And then she just ran for the shower when we were all finished.
Oh
And
my
but it
gosh.
was pretty funny. So anyway, that's the ridiculous backstory to how I shot this image. But yeah, so we can go quickly through this one to save time, because it's really a similar story as the last one. Just questioning, what does it look like for the body to decay? Can that also be beautiful? I really wanted her to have soft, beautiful hands in this image, and to just sort of be melting to the floor in a very elegant way, to say that there can be decay and there can also be beauty in one image.
Oh, interesting. They're like, it's almost like candle wax or something. It's not,
Exactly. And that's what I was going for. I didn't mean for it to look like glue. I wanted it to look more waxy,
it
but
it read as milk to me. I don't know why. I mean, it to me, I thought, yeah. I was like, I wonder how she froze that to get like
right,
the
right.
milk to stick and not and like completely coat the face. There must be, so it was glue. Okay,
Glue
that's
is awesome, by the way. It comes
yeah.
right off. It's so much better than paint. I didn't know until I shot this, but I'm a
Oh,
big fan
then
of
yeah, if
glue
you would have
now.
used white paint, it would have been a nightmare to get off.
Yes. Oh yeah, I've done that too many times. I know. But I've also used wax on this model actually before. I covered her whole body in wax, and it was a very long process, and it took 4 hours in the bath to get it off. So I decided no more wax.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, now I've got it going. Now I can go right to the next
Now
one.
you got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one is inspired by death masks, which I am fascinated by. Like, I could read about death masks all day. Which typically, when it was started, when the practice of death masks were started, it was a way to sort of immortalize the dying person. They would do a mask either before or after the person died, and then the family would take that mask home, which was like a mold of the person's face. Either before death, during death, or after. And then it became really fashionable to have death masks made. So like elite, members of society would have their own death mask made ahead of
Okay.
their death, because it was like a symbol of status, and they would hang it up in their homes. And then it's really gone out of style, this, doing death masks.
What culture is
But I
credited
think
with
it's
it?
fascinating. Who is?
What culture is credited with kind of popularizing it or starting it?
I don't know, actually. I should look into that,
Okay.
because I was focusing my research more on England,
Okay.
because I know that it became very fashionable there, but I need
Okay.
to do more research about the origins of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really interested in it, and I am on a mission to go make my own death mask somewhere now. I think that would be so cool. So this was my version of that, creating death masks, which I shot this by cutting a little hole in some black fabric, sticking my head through, and then for this one, my husband helped me, thankfully, pouring paint over me for the shots.
Okay. So okay, and then you composited all of those. So it's the same hole in the same piece of
Yes,
fabric each time.
yes,
Okay, because you can see there's like a little nook to it, and
uh-huh.
it okay, interesting. This is
Yep.
really cool. And that's just paint.
That's just paint. Yeah, this is one of my favorite images, and it's interesting because it's definitely the biggest departure for me of anything that I've ever created before. But I just think that it's so something that was very important during the series is that there is a sense of organic flow to the images, but also in some images that there is a sense of structure and rigidity in the images. And so I wanted this one to not have that organic flow that a lot of the images have, but instead be very rigid and structured, because I wanted to show that there are different ways that society deals with death and grief. Some are very rigid and structured, and some are very organic and free flowing. And so this was one of those that I wanted to structure.
Cool. How do you, so this texture is present in a lot of the pieces in the series that I've seen so far, but how do you get this kind of baked paper black texture?
Yeah,
This is the sheet.
it is the sheet, and then I shoot a lot of textures separately. So I'll go
Okay.
photograph cracking walls or floors or tree trunks or whatever I can find with good texture, and then I
Mhm.
overlay that so that it sticks to the background.
Okay, cool. Because yeah, that's man, how much less impactful would this be if this background was just flat, true black? It
That's how
would
I
be
feel.
less, it would be substantially less interesting, and it would have substantially less atmosphere. There is
Yeah, well,
something,
it would signal that it's a photograph. That's what it would do. And that's what I want to avoid is I don't want people to look at it and think, oh, she took a picture of somebody's head. I want you to think, oh, there are masks hanging on the wall or heads hanging on a wall or something more abstract than there's a picture of somebody's head.
yeah, you could have told me this was an installation somewhere on like a,
Right.
it's, and that's really cool because, an installation quite like this might not even be, you would lose some of that control you have over it and the color, and you wouldn't have this perfect even approach. And I don't know, there's just something
Yeah.
really excellent about this. Let's move on to number 4.
So I have to tell the story about this one because the model in this image was visiting me. She's a friend for a long time. I've known her, and she is about to get her PhD in art history. So I asked her, I said, tell me your favorite death ritual. And she loves to talk about this. So she was like, oh, okay. So she started going through like a bunch of different death rituals and some that I had heard of. And then she brought up reliquaries. And I had never heard of a reliquary. I've heard the word relic, but I had never really researched relics or anything like that. So she explained that a reliquary is a vessel that holds a relic. And so
Right.
often a reliquary is shaped like and is supposed to look like the thing that it's holding. So if let's say a saint lost a finger, 1,000 years ago or something, and
Yeah.
somebody found the saint's finger, they'll put the finger in a reliquary. So the relic is the finger, the reliquary is the vessel that holds the finger,
Okay.
but the vessel will look like a finger because there's a
Okay.
finger inside of it. And so I wanted to take this idea of the human body being a reliquary for the soul, but instead of there being a soul inside, there's nothing. There's just weeds growing through the reliquary, and there's really nothing inside anymore. Sort of a meditation on what happens when we die. Do you believe in the soul? Does it depart? Is it still there? Was there ever a soul to begin with? Are we empty vessels? What's going on? And so that
Mm-hmm.
was the backstory to this image.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
It
Yeah,
was really fun to do.
that's funny. I don't know if I've ever really thought about reliquaries in the real world before. They're always like the thing in fantasy that you have to destroy to get rid of the
Yes,
ghost or whatever. Like that's,
totally.
but yeah, but so that's really interesting though. They're always or typically intended to match the shape of the object inside.
Yeah.
Interesting. So this is
Yeah,
the
I never knew. I mean, like I've seen relics, like I've seen people's fingers before, but I
right,
never
right.
paid
It's always a
attention to what
finger
was
bone.
holding it.
Like right,
It
it's always
always is, right?
yeah, it's always some saint's finger bone, and it's stored in like side of a basilica or something.
Right.
That's really yeah. This might be my favorite piece. I love the image that I saw from you that was like the first thing that when you came on my radar was the one of the back exploding like a broken pillow, and
Yeah,
there's feathers and stuffing coming out. And this reminded me of that one, so this one became like my favorite of the series because
I
I don't know, maybe
appreciate
like
that.
yeah, maybe that I just have such a connection to that one piece. I really
Well,
love.
I've got this one printed really large, so I'm excited when we actually get to do a show because this
Oh,
one is
cool.
it's a big piece, and I really think that it's a lot of the series is gross, and you know, there are pieces that are more triggering than others.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's nice to have something like this where even though this is not normal, it's also in some way kind of peaceful to look at to me, as opposed to some of the other images. So I'm pretty partial to this one.
How much of this organic matter was there in real life when the photo was taken?
All of it was.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I had to add in what was inside of her body separately, but I shot it right there, and yeah, so it
Awesome.
was all there. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like tied up around her arm and it
Yeah.
gets wrapped around the feet and that. This is, man, fantastic. Okay, we're moving on to number
Thanks.
5. This is the last in the series we have on the website.
Yep. So I'm excited to actually show this one in person whenever that, you know, we manage to do that, because this one, I have this one also printed very large, and it's really striking very large. And I wanted to, going kind of back to the first image, to create another image with mingled bodies, but this time without being grotesque about it. So this image is all about sort of like the last one, this idea of the body and the soul. Are there two separate things in us, the body and the soul, or is it one connected thing? And so I wanted to show that this is, again, a self-portrait. And for me, it was really important to almost have one figure covering up the other figure, almost protecting the other one, as it departs the earth. So this one is definitely one that I'm excited to show in person. It has more impact, and the paint on it is pretty cool too. But
What?
you can't see that here.
Okay, has that not happened yet? Because this is just the digital image, right? You're not going to
Yeah,
paint on
that
it.
one is a work in progress. It has some
Okay,
paint on it, but I really dig how it's going. It looks really cool.
awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, this one is really really interesting. There's some. Oh, is this like a cropped line? Can you see my cursor?
Yeah, I can
There is-
see it.
So what's happening right here? My eye keeps getting drawn to this like
Yeah,
hard
so that
edge.
was my other arm leaning on the other person
Okay.
there. But I intentionally decided to create a lot of highlight and shadow in that area so that it
Mm-hmm.
almost looked amputated in a way. Because I wanted this image to be like, right now you can see the hint of one arm, but really just two arms coming out.
Right.
And I wanted it to be a little bit unclear of like what body part was mingling with the other one, which is one of the things that the paint enhances in the final displayed image.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of connection between this and the first one that we looked at in
Yeah.
terms of the commingling of forms and where does
Yes.
one start and the other begin. And that's an interesting commentary on the idea of the soul also, is like, how much connection does your soul have to this form? And if you have a system of beliefs that connects to reincarnation, then the soul is really significantly disconnected from the form in a lot of ways. And then
Right.
you talk about how much consciousness is connected to the body that it's within, and if they even can be separated, that's like a whole other philosophical argument that I think is really interesting. But there's
Yeah.
definitely a lot. I can't wait to just have some conversations about this show, and I think there's no reason that we shouldn't put this on in 2022. This is a timeless theme, so it's
Yeah.
not. I'm not worried about. I mean, it is incredibly pertinent right now. We've had a lot of people getting ill and passing away, and but it's not going anywhere. I don't see any reason why this wouldn't be great in our lineup in 2022. So I'm very very excited for that.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, let's end the share. And yeah, I just want to thank you so much for your time.
No,
This
thank
was
you,
really,
Eric.
really interesting to talk about, and you've been so busy with your kiddo. I'm really happy for you to just make the time, and we can really dig into this stuff. And I hope that everybody who watches this just feels enriched by the experiences as much as I do. And you can go check out our website, foothillsartcenter.org, and see these images for yourself. And you don't have to have me futzing around with my cursor on top of them. You can just look at them for yourself. So please, yeah, think about subscribing to our channel. And if you like the content that we're putting out, you can always donate to us at foothillsartcenter.org and get on our email list. And if you feel like you're missing these things, they're always, as they're published, they're always mentioned on our email that comes out weekly. And keep an eye out for Brooke Shaden's work coming to Foothills Art Center in real life in 2022.
Yeah.
Brooke, again, thank you so much. It really was a pleasure.
Oh, I'm so happy to do this. Thank you.